Strap in. I'm here to rock your world.
Melissa guide on how to use Melissa. I'm going to show exactly how her skills work and how to use her in battle. So let's start with looking at her build. So for her build, I pretty much always go with the crit build, because with that build you can burst enemies down pretty well. Corrosion Scythe, Windtalker, Hostlow and Berserker are her core items in this build. The last two items can be changed depending on the situation. For example, if the enemy has a lot of tanks, I usually go for Demon Hunter Sword instead of Rose Gold. Or if the enemy marksman is being problematic, I would go for Wind of Nature. And because Melissa has a pretty decent mobility with her absolutely busted dash, you don't need to go for any boots. I don't even get the sub item of the boots, she's just too cool for any type of boots. For Melissa, the marksman emblem works best because she benefits a lot from the attack speed it provides, and also it just gives attack and penetration. Weakness Finder is also necessary for her, since it slows down enemies and makes it harder for them to escape her skills, which is very important for her. Weapons Master is just there for extra damage, just like Fatal, for the extra crit damage and crit chance. Her best battle spell is without a doubt Inspire. She already has a decent dash, so Flicker would be redundant for her, and Inspire also gives her some more survivability because it regenerates her health. And you can burst down enemies a lot better when you have Inspire ready. So, Melissa's skills. Let's start with her beautiful dash. It's a dash. She dashes in the target direction, and she also gets an attack speed boost of 75% for a bit. The main purpose of this dash though is to combine it with her second skill. Her second skill throws models out into the field. If it hits an enemy, it will damage the enemies and link them. Linked enemies will receive damage when Melissa attacks anything. And if you dash after the skill has hit, the skill will move along with the dash. You can also dash before the skill has hit, and then it won't move at all. This is good if you need to get close really fast and you don't want to wait for it to hit first. You can also do a dash first and then hit the second skill. This is mostly good for chasing purposes, because the second skill slows down enemies. So. If you walk too far away from the second skill, it disappears, so be careful about that. And if there aren't any enemies, creeps or minions nearby, you can choose to attack models instead. For this to work, you need to have the attack method set to select targeting, which I'm gonna show you in a bit. And then you have to click the attack minions button, because as you can see, if you just use the normal basic attack, it doesn't work. The setting needed for this is under controls, and then right at the top it's the select targeting option. You can also see that the attack minion button is the bottom one. And here's a little example where I use a creep to damage enemies from pretty far away. Melissa's skill 2 has an outer circle and an inner circle. When an enemy enters the inner circle, they get linked and they also get slowed by 60%. When a linked enemy walks out of the outer circle, they break free from the link. I had to show this one in the river because apparently that's the only place the Laylas like to patrol. Since her skill gets stopped when she hits an enemy, you sometimes need to get a little inventive when you want to hit the enemy's backline, which is, by the way, also a fun and useful thing to do with Melissa's second skill, because that way you can also damage multiple enemies at the same time, even if they are further apart. And like I said, you can hit the backline with her very easily. Her second skill can reveal enemies as well, but only if they are at least inside of the outer circle of her skill. They don't have to get linked, they just need to be inside of the outer circle. That's enough to reveal them. Her ult creates a dome around her that pushes enemies back, and it also gives a cute little shield. It can be useful for a lot of things, but it's especially useful for escaping because of the way that the dome moves if you move away from enemies. Like, it creates a lot of space. You have to be careful if you get too close to the enemies too, because they can end up on the other side of the dome, which it can in some cases be bad. One of my favorite uses of her ult is of course the wall hug. With this you can basically continuously stun an enemy while also dealing a lot of damage. The wall hug combo is 2-1-3, so you first throw models, then you dash in and then you ult. The main thing to pay attention to is the dash range. You need to try to end up about this far away from the enemy as I'm showing in the example. It is very important to be at the right distance, because if you are too close they can escape and end up on the other side of the dome, and if you are too far away then they won't be pushed against the wall and they won't be stunned. This is something that simply requires practice, so you can basically at some point dream the correct distance while you're fighting or in combat. As you can also see in the examples, you can approach people from basically any direction that you want, as long as you end up in the correct spot. In this next segment I want to talk about the laning phase, but before that let me show you Melissa's best and worst matchups. So I made a tier list and I'm gonna go over each of the tiers to explain them in a bit more detail. At the top is the easily dominates category. This category is home to heroes that Melissa counters easily. These heroes either have very limited mobility, like Mia and Layla, or have a very short range, like Cuddy and YSS, or they are just really weak in the early game, like Obsidia. The limited mobility makes it so that they can't escape from Melissa's skill too. The short range means that Melissa can very easily poke, while the enemy can do pretty much nothing, and Melissa is just generally strong in the early game, so when she's up against Obsidia is gonna have a hard time. The second category is where Melissa can still win the lane, but the enemy has ways to outplay you, so you need to be careful. For example, heroes that can still outdamage you even if you have your skill 2 on them, or heroes that can escape your skill 2 and get close to you if you let them. And also heroes that can either stun you or outpoke you if you mess up your second skill. The skill matchup tier just means it's pretty much a 50-50. Both sides can outplay each other, and if no outplaying happens, no one dies pretty much. I do need to mention that one only becomes a threat after she gets her ult. Before that you should be fine with Melissa, you can usually still zone her pretty well. Also a special mention to Cloud, because while he probably won't kill you early on, he can still farm pretty effectively, and freezing the lane is difficult because of his teleport thing and his wave clear with his ult, so that's why I decided to put him in this category. The last category has the heroes that are an absolute pain to play against with Melissa, and they counter her in lane, mainly due to either outranging her and or outdamaging her, looking at you Clint, who might with a solid dash to escape from her skill 2. You cannot pay me to play Melissa against a good Clint or Granger, like I'd rather stay in the turret all game. Also be extra careful against these heroes, because if they freeze the lane you are royally screwed. Alright, so the laning phase. Always start off with Melissa's skill 2, and if you're up against an abomination like Clint or Granger or even a fighter, you could choose to go for Dreadnought armor first. If the enemy isn't playing overly aggressive, it's best to wait until the minions are about a third health and then use the skill 2. This way the enemy has to make a choice. They either stay and take the damage, or they lose gold from the minions, and this can usually give you some early advantage. After that, keep strategically using your second skill while using the minions to deal damage to them from a distance. When I say strategic, I mean aim it in a way where you block off most of their escape route. It's best to wait a bit with skill 1 until you know which way they are going, so you can follow them further. And so you can keep your escape if they suddenly decide to go after you. Try to only attack the minions, either if you are using your skill 2, if you are last hitting them, or if you can fast clear because the enemy gold laner is either dead or gone. Or if you see an army of enemies approaching and you want to get the hell out of there. Melissa has very strong damage early on, so it's worth it to be aggressive in lane. You do need to pay a lot of attention to the map though, because after you use your dash, you pretty much have no escape. If the enemy is especially quiet, you can use your skill 2 to check the big bush. This works a little better in bot lane since you can throw it while you're still underneath your turret. You can also use the gold crab to deal damage to the enemy underneath their tower, which makes her such an amazing poker. Just throw out your skill 2, then follow it up with a dash in the direction of the tower. For this it's very important to get the spacing right because you don't want to accidentally end up in the tower range. You can also use the crab to lure the enemy out of their safe little turret as well, by just keeping it at low HP. Low enough that they think they can get it, but high enough that it would need at least multiple hits. If you freeze the lane, don't just throw skill 2 out to try and deal damage. Only use the skill if they try to approach the minions. As long as you still have your skill 2 up, it will be very risky for the enemy to get their minions. So using it willy-nilly is likely to give them a window to get close. The best way to try and last hit the crab is by combining the damage of her skill 2 with a basic attack. That doesn't win against most other marksmen though, so just try to zone the enemy away from the crab to secure it. If you play it right and bully the enemy like this, it is very likely to get an early kill or at least force the enemy to recall. All of this is assuming you aren't playing against Clint or Granger. If you're playing against either Clint or Granger, you might win the first clash, but the second level 2 is in play, you better just relax and play it safe. Once you get your ult, you can play it a bit riskier to try and get a kill, since you're a little less vulnerable to enemy ganks. And the ult is just useful for securing kills in general, so you're way more likely to actually get the kill. If you're losing your lane early, you can try to last hit the minions with skill 2, so you at least don't miss out on the gold. This can be difficult to do, however, if the enemy is body blocking the minions. And also the skill 2 doesn't do that much damage, so you really need to time it right. Another way to still get to the minions is to just walk up to them and then hit them with your basic attack and just immediately dash out. You can also still try to poke, but if the enemy is too much ahead or is just really annoying, you sometimes just need to cut your losses and hope your team will come to help. But ultimately it's just best to not lose your lane. In the mid to late game, it starts getting a bit more difficult to hit skill 2, since enemies can appear from pretty much anywhere. You need to be more careful and more precise with where and when you want to throw models, because without skill 2 you lack a lot of damage. Ultimately it is better to just take a bit longer while aiming your skill 2 when actually hitting it, than just quickly throwing it and risking missing your skill 2. Later in the game you need to pay a lot more attention to the map to see when you are safe to go in. Once you go in, it takes about 4 seconds before your dash is back, so that's a lot of time for an enemy to sneak up on you and just ruin your day. Skill 2 is also really useful for checking bushes, so it can definitely be worth it if you're walking between lanes to just throw it at a scary bush. In the late game, Melissa's damage really starts to add up. So with enough items you can easily melt down squishy heroes in an instant, especially when you have Inspire ready. Even in the mid game with just 2 core items you can already burst down enemies, so definitely try to make use of that by going in whenever you see an opportunity. In the mid to late game, the ult becomes a very important part of your gameplay. You can use your ult in a lot of different ways, and I'm gonna show some interesting ways to use your ult. The most obvious way to use your ult is for protection from melee heroes. Only heroes with CC immunity can get through your ult, and there are only few that fit that criteria, such as Xborg in his ult form and Marsha using her ult, and probably some other ones as well. When using your ult this way, it's best to wait for the moment just before the enemy gets in range, so that you are protected for as long as possible. Another way to use the ult is to keep the enemy inside of your second skill so that they can't get away to get unlinked from it. This is mostly to deal more damage, it's not really protecting anything. Another cool way to use your ult is to cut off an enemy's escape route, like this. And I already showed this clip before, but I don't really have another clip to show this, so yeah. Of course you can also use the ult to do a wall hug and pin an enemy to the wall. This one is a bit more situational, but it's very satisfying to actually pull off. You just get to basically perma-stun an enemy like that. The best way to engage with Melissa is when the enemy is grouped up, and especially when you have your ult available and Inspire, you can usually get at least a couple of kills even when you go in alone. This is also why she works really well with heroes like Tigreal and Atlas who group enemies up. I don't think there's anything else to say about her, honestly. I hope the guy has been at least a bit useful, that would be nice. And yeah, the main way to learn Melissa is by just playing her a lot and getting a feel for the spacing and getting used to aiming your second skill. Also, you will need to be chill even when chaos ensues, because there's a lot to pay attention to when playing this chaotic hero. I love Melissa so much actually, and I hope you're gonna get addicted. Bye!